So as you can see behind me here, I'm editing this conversation that you're about to watch with my friend Ben Howes. I met Ben through a mutual friend. He was a graphic design artist that was working on some logos and things, and we just connected. We just started to see that we're both on a similar spiritual path, and we have been wanting to connect for a while, and I'm so grateful that we finally had the opportunity to sit down and have a proper conversation. I will say that we talked offline for an hour before this conversation began, so it kind of starts just like jumping right into it because we had already been talking for an hour. But it's really awesome to hear Ben's story. He grew up extremely Christian with a conservative Christian background and upbringing, and he went through a deconstruction of his faith and coming back around to spirituality through psychedelics. And where now he practices the tradition of Vedanta. So there's a whole lot with his story. I'll let him tell it. He tells it better than me. But just to give you a little intro here, the beginning is a lot more of his personal story, his journey of deconstruction. We talked then about some psychedelics and how that opens us up, has the potential to open us up. It doesn't always, but for Ben it certainly did. And then we talk about more of the non-dual reality that is found in all the world traditions, that every teacher is teaching us to see the union between us and God and the delusion of separation becoming dissolved. So I hope you'll enjoy this episode with Ben. It was certainly awesome to be able to talk with him, and would love to dig deeper into some of these topics with him. But without further ado, here's my friend Ben Howes. Speaking of stories, you were sharing with me a little bit about yours. And you growing up sort of in the church in Ohio and then going through your own deconstruction journey and, anti-Christian and then back to some degree of faith. And you've made a couple comments throughout the hour that we've been talking about, not being mad at Jesus and stuff. So that's a whole lot of things. I don't know where would be the best to pick up from all of that. Yeah. But where do you think would be a good origin spot to share some of your experience?
So I think from the time I've been a kid, I've been very, very spiritually interested. I was homeschooled growing up. I grew deep within the Christian bubble. And I was kind of just sheltered from the world. At the time I hated it, but really looking back, it's kind of a blessing because you see the madness of the world. You're like, I kind of had that peace from it. I spent a lot of time outside as a result. I wasn't really allowed to play video games. And I grew up in the early 90s, so everyone's talking about Nintendo and Sega. And I was just, I was reading books, and I was allowed to watch like half an hour of TV a day. And it was like, either Little House on the Prairie with my family or Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood.
Really? Dude, that's wild.
The rest of the time I was, for real, man, yeah. And we lived pretty simply. So and we didn't really have a lot of interaction with other people. So I spent a lot of time in nature. We had 60 acres where we lived in the woods. It was beautiful. And I really felt that I would just sense the presence of God in nature, the unified whole. I felt like I could just sense the energy of God in everything. And I would sing, I'd make up songs to God, and it wasn't theologically sound or theologically anything. It was just an expression of my being at that point. And so then I go to church where I heard that God lived, and church is the only place that I was really ever bullied. And I was bullied because I sang the same songs in church that I sang at home. And I thought that, well, hey, this is what happens at church. You sing songs about God. But I was, you don't do that in church because you got to listen to somebody else sing songs about God that have been signed off on and approved by some committee that conforms to the Nicene Creed, etc., or whatever,
The CCLI gets to dip into also, right?
Exactly. So I think it's for my whole life, it's been this interesting tension between the grid, the institutionalized grid of the church megastructure, and the genuine spirit of God in the organic and in the real. And my whole life, I've always rebelled against the grid, but I was always told that by doing so, I was, backsliding or whatever. The narratives. You've been in the church world. And so I think, but I really wanted to unpack this journey with God. I always knew there was something more. I was always attracted to like the 60s. My dad marched in the first Earth Day parade before he got really into, Christianity and stuff. And like, we'd have to listen to terrible like Mike W. Smith and like instrumental dulcimer albums of hymns most of the time. But my dad had a wood shop, and we'd go downstairs and he'd play like the Beatles and the Stones and the Guess Who, and like he played cool music. And like that was my entree into music, which is a huge love of mine. I played in bands for a long time when I had hair. And also art in general. And I was just really mystified by like the psychedelic art and music for some reason. And I think I know why. It was breadcrumbs for my later journey. So, but I was also terrified to touch that stuff because I really wanted to love God, and I was afraid that if I were to ingest these things or work with these plants, then I'd be opening myself up to demons and go to hell. The fear of hell. Two things really stuck out in my mind from a young age, and that was the concept of infinity and eternal life, and also the sheer terror of hell and eternal consciousness of never-ending torment, and never made sense to me. Still doesn't. So I go throughout my life. Essentially, I go to college, get married, and at this time, I went from like a Pentecostal church to a Reformed church in Columbus, Ohio. I won't say the name. It's like a pretty good church, actually. I like a lot of the people there. I played worship on the worship team. And
it's a
then
big come around to have that
I
affirmation.
Yeah, definitely. It was definitely interesting, but I've always been a seeker, and I saw in Pentecostalism there was always this like hyped up quality, like God's got to always be doing something. It's always emotional, and I've never emotions tire me out. You know what I'm saying? Like I can only handle so many emotions at a time, and like you can only run around the aisle so many times without catching on fire. So you're like, okay, what am I doing here? And so I like Reformed theology because it just seemed more chill, even though it's really not. Like when you think about what the implications of it were. But I was a seeker, and I was really into Mark Driscoll and who were the other guys, Piper and Sproul and all those dudes that I used to really nerd out about. And it was cool because we could smoke cigars and drink beer. So that's what we did. That was like we go to the bar and talk about theology, and it was fun. I liked it. But then, so I was a graphic designer. I ended up getting a job at a church and ended up being on staff at one of the largest Southern Baptist churches in Ohio. And I was kind of on ministry staff. And what really disillusioned me there was just hearing week after week all these stories about moral failings of pastors. Whether they were, it was usually always sexual sin or embezzling money. And week after week, and it was so disheartening for me because in my heart, like I always I'm like, I don't want to do that stuff. Like why do these people keep doing this? And I mean, our pastor, our ministry team was legit. He's a great man and very faithful to his wife and his family. But I ended up going on a mission trip to Peru, and what really got me away from the straw that broke the camel's back was I had this amazing time in Peru, and I've been smoking cannabis off and on since I was 18. I remember the first time I got high was at a Tom Petty concert, and then I had to drive my parents' van with my friends from Columbus all the way back to our rural town. I don't know how I made it home even to this day, but that was pretty much as crazy as it got, psychedelic or in that space. But I went to Peru, and I just remember like we were trying to minister to these people, and they were like it was way in this isolated mountain town called Yaquin. And they were like direct descendants of Incans. And they're still wearing like colonial dress and outfit from like the 1500s when the conquistadors came. It's that isolated. And they kind of synergized their like indigenous like teachings and spirituality with Catholicism. And of course, we were like the new colonizers that were coming down and telling them, no, you got to adhere by these 4 spiritual laws, and you got to, say these magic words at this special time. And it just showed me just how hollow it all was. And I just kind of thought, like, this is like the spiritual equivalent of going to a robust micro economy and just building a Walmart. It's completely spiritually destroying the culture that's there. And I got incredibly disillusioned. And this was also at the time of Trump. And so many Christians were, I'm not a political person anymore, but at that time I was pretty progressive politically. And I just couldn't understand why Jesus, who seemed to be anti-Trump, was being conflated with Trump, and I just got so sick of it all. So that's kind of my story of deconversion, and I became agnostic. And from there, I don't want to ramble too much, but I got into psychedelics, and that's really what initiated me on the path, the spiritual path that I continue to walk to this day.
So when you were talking about, my computer keeps jacking up for its. Sorry, I apologize. 1 second. When you were talking about the spiritual journey from the psychedelic experience, that almost would be a connection back to your original connection to nature that I hear you talking about. Like, that's where you first engaged with the divine. And it seems like after that experience of like, man, I'm witnessing more colonization happen, and I'm seeing that it's just more ideological stuff that we need people to verbally agree to. And then whenever you saw through that, I know earlier you had mentioned for a second, like, I became like a anti-evangelist, you know what I mean? And then, so at what point in time was it that you then stepped into the psychedelic space that potentially maybe connected you back to that original divine essence through nature, through that? Like, what was that experience like of being a kind of humbled, maybe? Is that an okay way to say it? Like, by the presence of nature, you know?
That's a great question. The first thing I did was acid in 2017.
I'm just plugging this in so I can hear you.
You're good.
I can hear you.
Okay, great. I did it at a Grateful Dead tribute concert with a bunch of like meth heads out in Indiana. It was a terrible experience. And it was like the guy that we got the acid from was free, but he ended up getting robbed later on that night by the meth heads because he wouldn't give him more free drugs. So it was not good, but that was a wild time. So I think initially I just really was kind of in like a Rumspringa phase where I'm like, all right, I'm no longer Amish. I'm gonna smoke all I want, drink all I want, do whatever the hell I want. Like, post on Facebook all the time, which is such an effective way of changing the world. Just being all in the ego. Like, it was just me, like my grievances, my victimhood, and also like because of the politics I was really into at the time too. It's like this like activist kind of vibe and energy. And so I think what really humbled me was like, it was a couple of years, actually 2019 is really when things started to change. I was kind of interested. So my ancestry is English and Scandinavian. So I was really into Norse paganism for a while, actually. I had an experience in LSD where I saw the Elder Futhark runes in the sky, at least what I thought was the runes, in gold on a blue sky. And I was just like really interested in that. And so that's really what kind of brought me to like a nature-based religion, which, all the gods of that pantheon are correlated to forces in nature pretty much. And then as my journey progressed, I started to really work with psilocybin, which has been hands down my favorite substance that I've used, because acid for me was very like hyper masculine, like energetic. I alluded to this earlier, but I almost died on acid because I was longboarding down a mountain in the Rocky Mountains while I was tripping without a helmet on or anything on, and then I wiped out and almost hit a boulder and died. And so that was a long night on the side of a mountain with no medical attention. But whatever, I'm still here for some reason. So I'm like, I'm gonna chill out and just head to the psilocybin zone because it's more of like a feminine energy, and
yes,
that's been really nourishing for me. And so I think what really caused me to have a really change in my heart has been a couple things. It's been psilocybin. I had a 5-gram experience, and it brought in a lot of chaos in my life because I made the mistake of bringing my phone in with me and calling a lot of people and saying a lot of things, and I came across as a madman, and there was some some definite repercussions in my immediate family as a result. And so after that, I took a year to really just go sober, and I just really reflected on the power of my words and my actions and what I did, and thought about the sacredness of these substances, and ended up moving out of state somewhere else. We got pregnant with our first child, and then starting in 2022, I went on several, well, starting in 2021, I went on several psilocybin journeys, did ayahuasca, and then also did DMT, vaporized DMT, and arrived at a place last year, almost exactly a year ago, where I had a 5-gram experience again, but this time I did not bring a phone into it, and I received, by God's grace, what I think is that experience that I've been looking for my entire life, of breaking through, of going beyond life and death, and seeing what really is. And as a result of that, I've kind of found a spiritual path that I've been committed to ever since. I found a teacher, a very wise teacher who I have much love and respect for, who is part of a lineage, who is training me in this path, and as well as others. And I've just committed my life and surrendered myself to growing in this relationship with God, who is not what I was told God was, but was always what I intuited God was, I guess. So that's, in a nutshell, my story.
Dude, can you speak a little bit more to that in terms of like you're talking about like your relationship with God, and like for me, like reconciling things through a very non-dual perspective. I've struggled with the sort of the mental gymnastics of like, how do I pray to God or have a relationship with God if I am God and all that, and I've really been able to incorporate what that actually means now, then it, almost single-handedly, by undoing the idea of God in a sort of like kingly sense, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
But yet still that, like panentheism, I think has been like the best descriptor for me. But what was that process like for you in terms of like entering back into relationship and surrender and service to God, and how, like, does God look like now to you? What is that? Because that language was used a lot growing up for me as a charismatic kid or whatever, but it's extremely, the essence of it is extremely different now for me. What was that like for you?
Charismatic, that's a great word for it, because I feel like in my psilocybin journeys, the charismatic impulse and experience was absolutely there, and as you know, it's such an emotional ride. It's such an artistic ride, a creative ride. I think, but the problem with that is that it gives you a lot of information, and without a disciplined path to apply that information, you can lose it, and you can, maybe in the case of people that we've mentioned, just kind of live in a state of permanent chaos. And I feel like we're called to a state of permanent peace, because that is our true nature, is wholeness. So I mean, a lot of it I would attribute it to my teacher, to my guru, who is just, it was almost a miracle how I was introduced to him. And his story is actually very similar to mine, and he is really, as any good teacher does, it was able to dispel the darkness and lead me down conversational trails that clarify these concepts. And so one example that I will share that really helps me understand the non-dual nature of all things is starting with the proposition that God alone is real. There is nothing else outside of God, because God, praise God from whom all blessings flow. Everything, God is the fountainhead. And also, that being said, there's nothing outside of our experience, because I have never been outside of my experience. Is there an objective reality outside of my experience of reality? I don't know. I've never experienced it. And can there be? We read about different people's experience. We read about history and all these different accounts, but we read them through our experience. And so the way that my teacher really broke this down to me was that the idea of a dream. When you have a dream, I think we identify ourselves as ourself in the dream. We're the main character of our dream. But when you have a dream, your mind is creating everything. You are the main character of your dream. You're you, the persona that you go through this life with. But you're also the monster that's chasing you. And you're also the audience of people that are laughing at you because you're in your underwear, presenting an essay or something at school. And you're also the stage that you're standing upon. And you're also the sky. And you're also the history of the characters in your dream. You are all of those things, but yet you perceive yourself to be just one of those things in the dream. Mm-hmm. And I'm convinced that, reality and consciousness exists on a fractal. You can see the unfurling of a fern is mirrored in the unspiraling of the cosmos. Heavens declare the glory of God. There's this like DNA that the macrocosm and the microcosm are infinite mirrors of one another. And so similarly, I think that this reality that we perceive to be real is also a dream. And you and I are playing roles within this dream as people on this show, podcast, talking. But outside of the dream, there is just one mind creating all these different characters. And so I think for me, bridging those two things is like realizing that fundamentalist religion is always, this is true, this is not true. But I think the truth in spirituality and mysticism is this is true and this is true. And it's taking those paradoxes and those opposites and it's joining them together. And so on one level, I am this character in the dream, and I play that character because that's what I'm used to. But I know that outside of the dream, I'm also something else. And so when I love that higher part of myself, I'm creating this feedback loop that fills my cup here in the dream, but also like says what I am at my highest expression is something unimaginable, unfathomable, and so immense. And I'm just so grateful that I am also that too. And I'm so grateful that I can experience this life and all the beauty of the physical world, but also have that awareness, that abiding awareness that there's something so much beautiful that I have always been, and that when this life is over, I will return back to. And that, I don't know, man, that's just love.
Dude, that is so good. Case in point. Like, yes. Yes. Like, that is Thank so you. Good, man. Because, like, and hopefully this could be a good segue into this of, like, you mentioned that you are, and I'm curious what tradition your teacher is in and what the path that you're following now, but you were saying that earlier offline, like, you're cool with Jesus. Like, and you said a line, you said, I understand him better now. And I think what you just said, like, that awareness that I've come to also, that sort of mystic non-dual truth that I think that Jesus embodied and said well, actually said really well in a lot of statements, but has just like it just the ancient Near East mind, the Hebrew mind, the Roman mind, the Greco understanding of the gods and us, and it just was like just too much of a apple wheel of death for them, that they're like, I don't know, I don't do we deify him? Is he a heretic? Like, and from an Eastern perspective, you're just like, oh, like, clearly he's a fully realized being. Like, he knows who he is. Like, and embodies the power that comes along with that. And he's a master. Yes, he's an avatar. And avatars, this is what avatars do. They fully embody, but yet they're limited to their human form. Like, this is the full expression of what incarnation has the possibility to be. That's what an avatar does. So anyways, now I'm on my rabbit trail here, getting excited. But with you, like, I'm curious, like, how that was. Like, is that similar for you in terms of how you see Jesus now? And you mentioned, like, the church doesn't really worship Jesus, Like, I don't know if you can speak a little bit to that you're rapping about offline.
So I think that there really are only two religions on Earth, and both, not even religions, let's say spiritual paths. And both spiritual paths are present in every religion on Earth. But there's two distinct ones. There's a saying that goes that religion begins in mysticism and ends in politics. And I think that is the drive. There are fundamentalism, dogmatism, dualism always leads toward political ends on Earth. and it becomes more about a religion of power, of control, of coercion, and fear. And the mystic path within all religions goes back to the source, goes back to the center, goes back to the initial beam of light in which all the colors of light, when they hit the spectrum of our understanding, refract from and reflect and come back to. So to be upfront, the spiritual path I follow is the path of yoga within the tradition of Sanatana Dharma, which is commonly known as Hinduism. I followed the tradition, the philosophy of Advaita Vedanta, which is just non-dual philosophy. And then I follow the Patanjali's 8-limb yogic path. And the goal of yoga is, not doing a bunch of poses and you know, whatever. I know that's kind of how it's, see it. Yeah, it's union, exactly. And so the mission of yoga is to unite everything that you think doesn't fit and make it fit. And that includes reactions that you have about things in your past. And so how do you reconcile? Jesus says, if I be lifted up from the earth, I will draw all men unto myself. And it's through mentally elevating these different things and bringing them, uniting them together, that you're able to, I think, draw people toward the truth in a way. And so I see Jesus as someone who took the mystical path within his religion. And I think I know the Bible. I used to be in Bible bowls, so I memorized the Bible, and we would do quiz bowls and stuff. I have a lot of the Bible memorized, or a lot of verses memorized. I still love Keith Green and a lot of Christian music. And for a while I thought, I'm doing this, so I can't. But what's beautiful about the yogic path is that there are no wrong paths. Like everything, God is bigger than any petty decision to believe in this energy source or that deity or whatever. It all melts back in the same thing. Yeah. And so that's been so freeing for me, because it's allowed me to fall in love with Jesus again, for who he was, who he said he was, not for what other people have been saying about him, from the books that have selectively been kept in the Bible. I've also been able to read the Gospel of Thomas and see how much of a non-dual thinker he actually was. And
yes, dude.
Not to sound like a fundamentalist myself, but I think there's one experience, and there's one thing. It doesn't matter what path you take. What matters is that you get there, and I think that's the goal of every human incarnation. Ultimately, is to reach samadhi, which is merging back with God, and then we have the choice of whether we want to stay there or whether we want to come back and serve other people and love other people, all the while remembering God.
Dude, that's it. Like the ultimate path is the samadhi, and I've been really digging into a lot of. I've always had a very interspiritual or world religion, comparative religion is what I would always play it off as. Is like I have an hobby in comparative religion. Meanwhile, I was actually really being shaped by something differently, but I'm still a Christian. This is a fun hobby, and then it's I started to, let go of all of that and really embrace a multi-lineage path. But as I ventured into Buddhism, and more recently, earlier this year, I was really reading a lot of Zen, and so even reading the Lankavatara Sutra, which is the actual sutra that a lot of Zen idea is based on. A lot of times it's Alan Watts is the GOAT, man. But I want to read some of the actual sutras, some of the actual lineages, and what was Bodhidharma actually all about, And so reading some of that, I thought for a little bit, you know what? I'm a Buddhist. I'm not a Christian. And it's so funny. It's the minute that I thought that, and for the few days that I considered being I'm this and not that, I was in meditation one day, and I just felt the spirit so what color shirt do you want to wear? Fine, fine. What, do you think that's a big deal? To your point of what you're saying is that it's so what changes now, Luke, if you do that? What really fundamentally changes? And it was yet another layer, those Russian doll things, right? is yet another layer deeper of like, oh, it doesn't, yet again, it does not matter your affiliation and association from this level of existence. It's like, if Jesus really is your yogic path, there's nothing wrong with that. As a matter of fact, I've actually had a renewed like sense of purpose of like, man, there is so much non-duality that is right here in this own Christ path that's been hijacked. And it's like, if I could help people, and it's, I understand that amount of people will likely be kind of small, but like if I could just help some people connect some dots a little bit, that would actually serve other people more than me just being like, I'm a Buddhist now and I go to the monastery and these are my people now and I eject myself from that. So like, to your point, I'm just kind of riffing here, man, but like, to your point, like it doesn't, there is only two spiritual paths. Okay, sure. So follow Bodhidharma's teachings. That doesn't mean that you can't also be the awareness of Yeshua that had this awakening. Like it is. It just is. And I love, like Richard Rohr saying, like everything belongs. Like it's right in its place. So stop trying to chop it up. There's nothing to chop up. You know. So it's like.
But that's. I mean, that's. So, I mean, think about the story of the Garden of Eden is the perfect example of that. Like, from a metaphorical, esoterical perspective, like you have fullness, like God, walking with God. Like you have this awareness of Creator, and like, and to the point, like where the line of where you end and Creator begins, and vice versa. Is you don't have the knowledge of that, right? You just have this awareness, this abiding awareness of walking in that presence, in that spiritual garden, in that in the void, in Nirguna Brahman, in the nothingness. That's the Garden of Eden. And then we're always tempted with the choice, and the choice is: do I want to be God myself? And not do I want to separate from this and say that myself is more important than this, that I want to find identity in this. And I don't think that's necessarily an evil thing. I think that's a natural thing, because my son right now is becoming a toddler, and he's separating from just being this blob that gets taken care of and fed to being a person with a lot of will and emotions. The story of the garden is the story of every single person who lives, come into this world in that samadhi state. They leave that state because they choose their will, they choose their ego. And then the story of Jesus is becoming he's the new Adam. He brings us back to, he's one of the many gurus that bring us back to that place of union with God. And Jesus never said he was God or the Son of God. He says, "Who do you say that I am?" Mm-hmm. And that's the sign of a true teacher, because the true teacher is a window to the divine. It's not a portrait, a self-portrait of "look at me, I am the divine." They're a window to the divine. Who do you say that I am? I am nothing. I am nobody. I am empty. I am just a window. I'm just a way in which you can hopefully look through me and my example and see something else, and find that within yourself as well. Be still and know that I am God. You know?
Yeah. Like, dude. He always pointed to the Father, always pointed to the All, always pointed beyond, never once asked. I told this to a friend the other day who's still quite Christian, but like he's like a closet universalist, and he's like, I said, dude, Jesus never once asked you to worship him, ever. Yeah. He said follow him and share the teachings to other people, and his teachings of baptism and the lifestyle that he lived, but that was nothing to do with conversion and worship and this obsession that we currently have today with, what sentences people say. He himself says time and time again, you will know a tree by its fruit. And you will understand the nature of someone not by their affiliation, but by the essence that they carry. Like, this comes straight from the master, from the guru, and we don't even realize in the West that guru, like I think you mentioned, I don't know if it was offline or online, but it means dissolver of darkness. Like remove, they help us remove and see through the darkness, the illusion, the fog. And it's like,
Yeah.
that's all Jesus said that he came to do. He said, I came to show you the Father. If you've seen me, you've seen the Father. Like, I'm helping you bridge this illusion of separation. So he literally, the only thing that he is telling people is, I'm bringing healing, I'm bringing wholeness, essentially. Sozo is salvation. It's this idea of healing, making one. The only definition of ministry that we have from Paul, if we want to even talk about him, but is the ministry of reconciliation, or to be reconciled means to be put back into union, into oneness, into wholeness. That's the only thing that service is ministry, the service of helping people become whole. That's it. That's all we're here to do. And we get sidetracked on images. Like always, we get those apples in the garden that we're so interested in that pull us away from that, you know? And I got to digress and begin to go offline, but I want to record at least your comment about, and if you could speak to about what you mentioned about modern churches, how they don't really worship Jesus. And it was just this off-the-cuff comment. And I've held on to it, so I know I'm kind of putting you on with it, but it's stuck, dude. It's stuck.
Well, first I'll say I'm the last person that you should listen to about any church planning advice or ministry advice. I'm just a guy that alone in his thoughts a lot as much as possible. But I think I would say there's that verse in the Bible that I always think about. They have a form of godliness but deny its power. And I think even the word worship, I think, is a really problematic word, because the word worship essentially means to ascribe worth to something. And if you're worshiping something, then you're not it. And I think the truest understanding is you are it. Does that mean you should worship yourself? No, it doesn't. And I think that's where a lot of people get it wrong. I think it's funny, a lot of people, will leave the church and they'll go to the New Age. And, well, the New Age is it's the new cage. It's evangelicalism with crystals. It's really not that much different a lot of times, because there's no lineage, and it's just a mishmash of things. And it's a lot like, it's rootless. It's a tree that is cut off from roots and therefore bearing, bad fruit. And I think that with the church, I think that, and I want to use my words wisely here, because I know that people's hearts are in the right place. I think that people, they just do what they think is right, and they're not maliciously trying to do anything wrong. Or I think about people I know who are really deep in the duality narrative of, like, Jesus is coming back and we got to fight against the forces of darkness. And they're good people that are sincere, that love God, and they're genuine people. But I think the God that most of this world worships is fear, because fear is a powerful motivator. And if you can keep people afraid, then you can get what you want from them, and you can keep them docile. And I think what we're starting to see with this generation, it seems to me, is that a lot of people are realizing that we don't have to live in fear. Fear is, bad things will always happen. Jesus says, in this world you will have trouble, but I give you this peace, that where I am, there you may be also. If we take on the mind of Christ, samadhi, if we yoke ourselves to the divine, then we realize that there's nothing external of us that can even begin to diminish what's internal in us. Many waters cannot quench this love, as Song of Solomon talks about. And I think what's wrong with the church in so many ways is that they are clinging to old wine and old wineskins, and they're clinging to their 1800s, 1700s translations, 1500s translations, whatever, this moment in time in the past. And they're forgetting that we're in the eternal now always, and the voice of God is always speaking, and that the voice of that the hearts of his people are always seeking after him. And we just want to tie it to a man or a movement or a message from a certain period of time. And I think that people are just tired of that, because look at the world that we live in. Grid is constantly expanding. We're losing biodiversity. We hate each other. We've forgotten who we are, and as a result, we think that by defining ourselves by what we're not, we can find out who we are. But by defining ourselves by what we're not, that's the first step in the right direction toward realizing who we really are. And we're not all that important, and we're not all that special, and we can laugh at ourselves, and we can enjoy life, and we don't have to be tied up in the market or the economy or all these different fears, because the worst thing that can happen is death. And I've been on the other side of death, and it's an absolutely wonderful place. And you're going to be like, why was I afraid of this for so long?
Yes, dude.
So I hope that answers the question.
Dude, it answers it great. It just makes me feel like we need to do some more of these with some more pointed topics and allocate some more time, man. Because, like, this stuff's really good. And I guess it's so hard for me to wrap up, dude. There's so much more that I want to riff on this with you about, you know? But I think that's like what's...
We have a part two.
Yeah, we need a part two. We need a part two because I feel like we're just barely scratching the surface on some of these things. And I feel like, you know, I feel right in saying, like, it feels good to have somebody who understands, like, just the understanding of the expression of who you are and coming from a Christian background perspective like yourself and with me, like I have, and then, like, also the psychedelic experiences as well. And just, yeah, man, it's camaraderie is a really beautiful thing. And I think that it can happen, and a lot as an encouragement for anybody, if there's anybody that's still going to church that listens to any of my shit. Like, the point is that, you know, you can find community and like-hearted people, and it just takes time. And you know, I know there's a lot of people that are still just trying to sort through it all and figure it out, and they hold on to their communities because they're scared of losing that community. But, like, there's glimmers of hope, like me chatting with Ben right now, and I'm just really grateful for that, and grateful for your wisdom, and appreciate you spending some time here, man. Connecting dots for us all.
That's what it all is. I mean, I don't have any answers. I don't, you know, I know nothing. But I will leave you all in the audience with something that my mom used to say. No matter where you are in your spiritual path, what traumas you've had in the church, how heavy or broken your heart is, I want to share with you something my mom used to always say to me. Jesus loves you, and so do I. And I think there's great hope in that.
That's beautiful, dude. That's beautiful. Thank you so much, my friend.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. This has been a lot of fun.